Terra has an unquestioned class system. This rule was established by a hero whose name was the Seventh Blade King. Even the greatest warrior in history, the First Sword King, who defeated the Dark Spirit Lord and saved humanity, was not exempt from this rule. He suffered the fate of all traitors to the Empire, execution. Thus the rebel Liba Lanlot lost his head. This situation allowed envious people to vent all their anger on the defenseless grandson of the hero, who, however, was not going to surrender to his offenders and snapped at them even when the situation did not favor it. And now ssiL told the insolent men who were smashing his house that they were not worthy to even clean his shoes, and for that he got it. They ordered him to stop behaving so insolently, because now the grandson of the rebel had no more power than a slave, but the boy objected that such bastards only reminded him of his noble origin. They showed ssiL their sacred seals, which only the chosen masters possess, and reminded him that the young man was not only the traitor's grandson, but also a jerk, deprived of the ability to use even a fraction of the seal's power. Suddenly, a small slave girl appeared on the doorstep of the building, informing the two masters that training had begun. After waiting for the jerks to leave, Xiao inquired about ssiL's well-being, but he objected that he didn't care about such minor wounds. She apologized, for if the boy hadn't gone to protect her, she would have remained unharmed, but ssiL explained that it was every man's duty to protect girls. Xiao noticed that the young man didn't look like a slave at all, but the overseer followed her, ordering her companions to get their asses up and get to work. Soon he was sitting on the range cleaning the fighters' weapons. It had been 5 years since ssiL had become a slave. His family, his father, mother, younger sister, he blamed his grandfather for everything that had happened, because everyone would still be alive if he hadn't betrayed the empire. In any case, he promised himself that he would make those bastards pay for what they had done. After receiving another slap from his superior, ssiL was finally convinced that he had to get out of here as soon as possible. He promised that once he released the power of the sacred seal, no one would be able to treat him like a lowlife anymore. Xiao queried if this power wasn't unleashed from birth, but she didn't even realize that after his grandfather's betrayal, ssiL was imprisoned and had his blood drawn every day to finally unlock the secret of the First Blade King's power. In prison, he was also experimented on and even had dark demon cells or something like that implanted into his body in an attempt to awaken his power. Eventually, after realizing that the power of the sacred seal would never awaken, the bastard sold the guy to a local slave trader. ssiL confessed that he believed that as long as he was motivated enough, the power of the seal would surely unfold, which was the reason why he continued to endure the beatings of the training fighters. Suddenly, one of them grabbed Xiao by the hair and lifted her up, reminding her of his request to bring medicine. The young man ordered her to let go, however he received a blow for his insolence. Unwilling to tolerate such insolence, ssiL threw his sword at the offending men, but the warrior only fixed the blade in flight and then pointed it back. The young man tried to dodge, but at the last moment he fell down, clutching at his wound. Suddenly, the deputy captain of the squad appeared behind them and was surprised that the warriors had decided to disobey his orders about training and engage in some mischief. They immediately complained about the slave who had attacked them with a weapon and who had to be put in his place. Mr. Philip noticed that ssiL could have killed his slave with one blow, but he did not expect him to dodge. Suddenly he struck the boy in the stomach himself. After watching his reaction, the man stated that he considered the traitor's grandson to be a real man, as he didn't whimper in pain even after getting hit at the wound site. Nevertheless, without skill, he is simply useless. Philip recalled that the slave's father, Dean Lanlot, was an outstanding alchemist among the 5 other great sages of the empire. The mother, Elena, was a brilliant spiritual master, and the grandfather, as is already known, was the first king of the blade. However, he betrayed the empire and was executed, and the Lanlot family was destroyed with him. The man informed him that without the sacred seal, ssiL was the mere grandson of a rebel who had fallen into disfavor up to the point of slavery. ssiL interrogated the audience as to whose dog was barking without shutting up. In that case, the deputy captain decided to demonstrate what the slave's fate really was, and stabbed Xiao with his blade, explaining that even if the slave was chopped into pieces, no one would say a word against it. Unable to bear such atrocity, the young man broke free from the hands of the warrior holding him and tried to pounce on the ruthless killer, but he only swung his leg, sending ssiL into a long flight. When he felt the pain go away, he assumed he was dying, and a voice in his head confirmed his guess. ssiL wondered what was happening, if death was the impetus for the awakening of his seal, but the dark demon asked him not to worry, for with death came the time for a new existence. ssiL was well aware that dark demons were the worst enemies of mankind, and therefore stated that it was better to die, but it was not his decision to make. The demon explained that he had been waiting for this opportunity for hundreds of years, but promised that he would provide the boy with a small gift as a token of their upcoming coexistence. Seeing the slave land on his feet, his abusers became furious and one of them rushed to finish what the captain had started. The demon warned that thanks to the blood memory estiḻ would be able to inherit all the abilities of his great ancestor, but the extent of their use would depend on how strong the lad himself was. Waiting for the warrior to get closer, estiḻ sealed him to the ground with one sharp movement. His comrades thought the slave had gone mad, not even realizing that the source of his powers was a demon. In the meantime, strange thoughts were running through his head, a stream of which continuously continues to burst through. Mom, Dad, and even Grandpa, he saw everything they had experienced in their lives. The demon explained that this was how it was supposed to be, knowledge, experience, and honed skills all imprinted in his mind as estiḻ had inherited their abilities through blood memory. Suddenly Roy stood up, perplexed as to how some petty slave had dared to strike him, and despite the warnings of his comrades, rushed back into the fray. Dodging the warrior's attacks, estiḻ seized the moment and locked his arm, mocking his technique and ridiculous movements. He kicked his assailant in the leg, causing him to fall to the ground again, clutching the sore limb. Of course, estiḻ noticed that he was in pain, but his strength still wasn't enough to break his leg. However, just a moment ago, he knew absolutely nothing about these techniques. Although that demonic voice in his head said that estiḻ had inherited his ancestors' abilities, the young man was still limited by his own physical performance. He was determined to become stronger by all means. Mr. Philip noticed the change in the slave's movements, as his technique now resembled that of a true seal master, but Philo still wanted to avenge his comrade, so he also joined the fight, thus attracting the crowd's attention. A few swings of the blade had no effect, estiḻ dodged them with ease. After some more time of fighting, the two apprentices managed to grab what they thought was a distraught slave. They were about to finish him off, but the young man explained that low-level techniques like theirs could easily be countered and absorbed, and so he promised to show the two slaves the superior bull strike technique his grandfather had learned in the East. Watching estiḻ amplify his attacks with his own, Roy wondered how this was possible, since it was beyond human capabilities, but the idiot didn't seem to realize that he was facing a true master of the seal. The warrior shouted that it was nonsense, because the power of the seal is revealed immediately after birth, but the guy only wondered if these useless techniques were all Roy was capable of. Despite the way he flaunted his title of seal master, estiḻ assumed that deep down he still recognized himself as trash. In any case, he promised that he was about to demonstrate true mastery and released a huge amount of energy that horrified even Mr. Philip himself. He couldn't believe his eyes. Even if this slave really did possess such an aura, he still couldn't know, much less use martial techniques of such a level. Suddenly, estiḻ realized that despite his grandfather's abilities, he couldn't use even a small part of them due to his own physical limitations, so he simply froze in place, leaving the audience puzzled by the lack of a decisive blow. In that case, he decided to act differently and, coming up close to Roy, struck between his legs with such force that the cuckoos were definitely shattered. Suddenly an assistant came running to Mr. Philip, informing him that he had been summoned by the city lord. The man declared that today was the slave's lucky day, and seeing that the fight was over, estiḻ immediately ran to his wounded friend. He was flanked by the other slaves, thanking him for spouting off the general outrage, but the young man ordered him to cut the crap and get Shao to the Guild of Saints. He noticed that all these idiots had only become so friendly now, however, it didn't matter now anyway. It all seems like a dream, but estiḻ had indeed obtained the holy seal and the powers of his kin. This means that, primarily for their sake, he finally got the opportunity to get his revenge. One of the slaves began begging Emily's guild secretary to help them, pointing to the injured Shao, whom the newly minted seal master had been carrying in his arms the entire time. The confused girl assumed that they belonged to the city lord, and the guy confirmed it, reminding them that help could be given to anyone related to him. In that case, Emily asked to carry the injured one inside. When she reached the pharmacy, she informed Mr. Allen about another patient, which surprised the healer very much, since he had just recently admitted 2 more. However, he was even more surprised that the negligent secretary had let a bunch of slaves in here. Even if they served the city lord, they couldn't be admitted without his orders, so the healer asked him not to interfere with his potion brewing. estiḻ objected that they didn't need his help, just a couple of cures, but Allen said that just 1 vial was worth more than all their miserable lives. Suddenly something exploded in the cabinet, and the healer rushed back to the potion, begging the compound to stabilize. Unlocking his father's memories, İİRyiL warned that the potion was missing a few more ingredients, and so it would explode if only a little more of the power of the sacred seal was applied. Before he could finish his sentence, the cauldron burst into flames, much to Alan's disappointment, as another set of ingredients had been wasted. Alan shouted that it was all the slave's fault for interrupting him at the most crucial moment, but İİRyiL explained that the formula had been wrong from the beginning. According to the young man, Alan overdid it with a few herbs and minerals, which made the liquid too thick. The explosion was inevitable, because after all, the creation of destructive blood is forbidden by the guild, and the original recipe was destroyed long ago. The alchemist hesitated to find an excuse, and claimed that he was conducting the experiment for academic purposes, and had no intention of ingesting the blood at all. İİRyiL noticed that despite the rather rapid increase in mastery of the Holy Seal, however, there were a number of disadvantages. For example, one could go insane. Alan as well as Emily wondered how a simple slave could know so much about such a complex potion. He confessed that he was the son of one of the 5 greatest alchemists of the empire, Dean Lon Lot, and then began to groom the laboratory, wondering what expensive and exotic materials Mr. Alan possessed. İİRyiL promised that he would help create destructive blood, but pointed to the blatant overseer who was begging the higher powers to save this poor dying girl. After examining Xiao, the healer concluded that her energy and blood were in short supply, so a potion was needed that would eliminate those deficiencies. Soon, Alan reported that his part of the bargain had been fulfilled, so it was time to create the destructive starblood. When he received the vial with the coveted greenish liquid in his hands, the alchemist couldn't believe his eyes. He had been struggling with his experiments for more than half a year and had failed countless times, and this brat had finished in just a few minutes. In any case, the appearance was as described in the recipe, and İİRyiL assumed it was quite good. Nevertheless, he snatched the vial from Alan's hands, letting him smell the slightly sour grape odor. The alchemist was about to return the potion to him when the young slave let go of the vial, causing it to shatter and the contents to spill all over the floor, rendering it unusable. That was the end of their exploration. Alan grabbed the youngster by the scruff of the neck, asking what he was just thinking, and İİRyiL explained that the research could be continued with a recipe described in an alchemy compendium. There was no point in hiding any longer, and so the healer shouted that he wanted to strengthen his sealing power. Emily warned that she would report everything to the guild president if Alan didn't stop, but the latter said he didn't care. All he wanted was just to return to the capital. Sir Alan was once one of the most famous alchemists in the empire, but during one of his experiments he burned down the laboratory along with all the rare ingredients, which is why he was exiled here. In any case, the enraged alchemist warned that serious punishment would follow for such a serious offense as breaking his precious potion, but İİRyiL explained that this destructive blood was of no value anyway. The young man talked about how he knew many good skills, but everyone was chasing after the one most valuable one, skill enhancement. It sounded like sheer nonsense, but Alan still remembered who this slave's father was, and so he assumed it was still worth listening to. The overseer said he would take Xiaomi back to dinner, but the alchemist wondered what he should do now. İİRyiL explained that he didn't want to give knowledge to a man he thought would only bring chaos, and Alan warned that he had other ways of getting his interlocutor to tell the truth. In that case, the slave offered to use these methods, and suddenly the alchemist was on his knees, begging to be told about this technique of leveling up. Emily warned that it would negatively affect the guild's reputation, but Alan ordered him to shut up, and then he put his arm around İİRyil's leg altogether, explaining that his dignified life had never been so miserable, so the young man decided to help after all. While dining with the other slaves, he used the potion to make the food more nutritious, and after this procedure, its flavor also changed. Now even the bread tasted like roast beef. As expected from an ability created by his genius mother, the body's recovery was accelerated by sleep. İİRyiL had only slept 3 hours, but still the pain and fatigue were gone. He caught himself thinking that he wouldn't have even realized how weak he was if he hadn't awakened the power of the seal. He had promised his parents that he would definitely take the opportunity they had given him and avenge both of them. Now that İİRyiL had fully recovered, he decided to strengthen his body and borrow the abilities of someone he hated with all his heart. Summoning his grandfather's power, the young man performed a divine strike. This technique can push the body to its absolute limits, bringing every part of the body into a state of intense hardening. In such a state, physical performance would grow at an incredible rate even with simple training. Suddenly, it went downhill. Everything has its price, because this is not only a serious strain on the body, but also significantly reduces life expectancy. This seemed to be the secret to the power of the First Blade King. Now it's no wonder how he managed to become so strong. In any case, he promised that he would be even more ruthless to himself and would definitely surpass his grandfather. Alan was almost rattling his lab again, furious at the errand of this insolent slave, for the day before, İRyiL had asked him to find some rare ingredients. Not only did the alchemist have no idea if such herbs were found in the empire, but there was no guarantee that the young man would keep his word this time and share the secret of how to become stronger. He tossed the sheet with the formula away, but suddenly there was a knock on the door, and the fourth-class seal master, Lady Garcia, appeared on the doorstep. By the way, she had also given the recipe to the guild president, Mr. Edward, who was very interested in what was written. The girl even suggested that it might be a clue. Alan couldn't believe his ears. They were really doing research. It seemed that the brat's recipe was really valuable. Garcia asked her uncle if the formula belonged to him. If it was true, she simply asked him not to say that he owned the legacy of the soul hardeners. The legacy of the soul quenchers is a mysterious alchemical recipe rumored to have circulated among the guilds. This mystical recipe is capable of creating creations beyond imagination. However, due to the dangers of the recipe's particularly powerful energy, known as dark alchemy, it was deemed by the 5 greatest alchemists to be destroyed. Alan immediately began to deny that he had nothing to do with this formula, because he simply had nowhere to get such knowledge. He had not expected that this girl, who had the freedom to travel to search for the legacy of soul caster Finn Garcia, would be in his laboratory. Nevertheless, she had noticed a rather peculiar recipe. It could surely be used to strengthen the sacred seal. She admitted that she'd like to delve into this research with the dumbfounded alchemist, though she didn't have time for that right now. Throughout Terra, seal masters are relentlessly striving to increase the strength of their seals, represented by their own ranks. Seals have 12 classes, and as they increase, a person's physical stats will increase by leaps and bounds. Moving up to a higher class is extremely difficult because, among other things, it requires significant effort to improve using potions as an auxiliary resource. It is necessary to carefully hone your combat skills, hardening them in battles. The other slaves watched in amazement as İRyiL single-handedly dragged the huge boulder on his shoulders. He knew he had to get stronger as soon as possible. He kept replaying in his mind the demon's words about blood memory. He had inherited the skills of his dead family members, his mom, dad, and even his grandfather, but not his younger sister Ellen. He even expressed hope that she was still alive. After all, the girl was born already with the sacred seal, so she was definitely not the type to mess with so easily. The young man was determined to find perhaps the last surviving relative by all means. In any case, as expected from Liba's combat skill, İRyiL's body transformed into that of a warrior in the blink of an eye. However, this also depleted his energy reserves, and there was no way to recover physically with potions yet. That was why he had to enlist the help of Xiao, who had previously trained in massage. This way natural recovery replenished his energy while he slept, and in combination with massage, the body would recover much faster. However, with the current physique of the first-grade sacred seal, simply expending spiritual energy to restore it wouldn't help expand its supply. The main obstacle to this goal remained the current low level of the seal. Suddenly, a warden padded into the room, informing İRyiL that he was being summoned to the Guild of Saints. The young man assumed that Alan had already gathered all the necessary ingredients. The alchemist was nowhere to be seen near the guild building itself, however, and suddenly a sword came flying at İRyiL, which he managed to dodge. From around the corner came the deputy captain of the squad and one of his charges, Roy, the one the slave had charged between his legs with all his might. Philip announced that it was time to pay for the abuse of his seal masters. The man noted that even if İRyiL was a first-class seal master, he was no match for a second-class master, but promised to consider mercy if the slave would beg for it on his knees. Nevertheless, İRyiL mocked this pathetic attempt at recruitment, suggesting that the squad was indeed having major combat capability problems due to one of the masters dropping out for health reasons. Tired of listening to the slave's mockery, Philip moved forward, sword ready, and it was more like it. İRyiL had said that the man should have attacked him from the start. Philip used the furious tiger technique, but the young man had no trouble avoiding the attack. Of course, a second-class seal master with mid-level skills was a troublesome opponent, but İRyiL noticed that the deputy captain was too slow to take full advantage of the technique. Philip launched several more unsuccessful, albeit rather dangerous attacks, shouting that the slave would never be able to overcome the difference between classes. Bouncing back once more, İRyiL managed to pick up the blade launched at him earlier from the ground. He then moved sharply to his opponent and dealt him a non-serious, albeit very painful, injury. The young man noticed that all techniques were completely secondary and of little importance if the warrior remained open the entire time. Finally, it was time to go on the offensive, and İİRyiL used the spiritual art of killing retribution, driving his fist into the face of the bewildered Philip. Meanwhile, the city lord welcomed his dear guest to his castle. He admitted that he had already heard about the purpose of Lady Garcia's quest, though he noted that it was exactly what one would expect from one of the empire's most brilliant alchemists. The girl thanked him for the compliment, but explained that the real purpose of the search for the legacy of the soul hardeners was to find a cure for the disease of the underworld. Mr. Herman regretted that he could not help in that case, because only a spiritual master of the seal could unlock the full potential of the legacy, which, by the way, is very few not only in the city, but also in the country. Nevertheless, Garcia thanked the Lord again, for the permission to stay here was already a great help to her. As she walked through the city streets, the girl reflected on the fact that there really didn't seem to be anyone in Greyrock who was versed in the spiritual arts. Sure, she had some clues about the coveted cure, but one could not do anything without being absolutely sure. She was determined that she would never fail, but suddenly there was an explosion, and the next second Mr. Philippe broke through one of the walls right in front of her. Garcia recognized her guide, but İİRyiL appeared in front of him and held his blade directly to the man's face, suggesting that she finally end it all. The deputy captain recognized that the slave had won this time, but suddenly the latter stuck his sword right into the leg of his defeated foe. By get it over with, İİRyiL meant death, and a rather painful one, given what Philip had done to Xiao. Lady Garcia herself decided to intervene in the lynching process, wondering why the young man wanted to kill his already surrendered opponent. Looking at his clothes, the girl realized that before her was a slave, and therefore reminded that the murder of his master is considered an unpardonable crime, but Lacey only asked what she cared about everything that was going on. Such insolence confused the girl. Even the city lord treated her with respect, but this slave dared to show such insolence. She even wondered if all the slaves in the city had such freedom. By the way, at that moment, Alan was also passing by, and İİRyiL was very happy to meet him. The alchemist said that he had already gathered all the ingredients in the neighboring city and was going to look for him, but he didn't expect to meet the young man here. He smiled nonchalantly and pointed out to Alan that he was a bit busy at the moment, but suddenly Philip cried out, begging to be spared, and İİRyiL said that he would keep the seal master alive this time, but warned that he would keep his sword. Finally, he offered the alchemist to go to the laboratory under the fierce gaze of Philip, who promised to repay all humiliations as soon as the captain returned. Lady Garcia also decided to spare the ignorant slave and was about to go to rest, but her plans changed when she heard the two men discussing the recipe. After looking over the ingredients, İİRyiL noticed that some of them were not of the best quality, but the alchemist asked to be at least a little grateful for at least finding everything on the list. In any case, the young man warned that he would have to borrow a cauldron for cooking as well, but to begin with, Alan reminded him of his promise to reveal a way to increase his talent level. In that case, İİRyiL asked what level of alchemy the old man now possessed, and he said the initial one, which surprised the young man. It seems that now the guild lets anyone into its laboratory. Then Alan asked the slave himself to name his level, and he awkwardly admitted that he had an elementary level in alchemy, martial, and spiritual arts. At this, the old man perplexedly shouted how dare İİRyiL mock him, but he suddenly stopped and asked again if he was really talented in the spiritual arts. Using the power of the sacred seal, humans have developed 3 different disciplines: alchemy, martial arts, and the rarest of them all, spiritual arts. The first allows them to extract, decompose, and fuse materials to create medicines and equipment. The second is to deal devastating damage in combat, and finally, the spiritual art allows you to create magical spells and illusions by manipulating soul energy. However, due to the scarcity of masters with such a talent, there are only a small number of techniques developed. Generally, the sacred arts are categorized into 5 main levels: beginner, basic, intermediate, higher, and elite. People are born with an innate talent for certain disciplines. The 12 seal classes determine a person's physical form and strength, while the talent index reflects mastery of a particular art. Suddenly Alan felt an unpleasant sensation, but İİRyiL explained that he was simply trying to ignite the core of his soul. This will sharpen his senses and improve his alchemy skills. However, the effect was temporary and the subsequent recoil made such a method extreme, but with Alan's own starting option, there were simply no other options left. Finally, the procedure was over, but İİRyiL warned that now everything depended only on the alchemist, for if he continued to practice his talent, he would definitely see an improvement. In any case, now he offered to create some potions, as it would be a great practice, and Alan gladly expressed his desire to join, but asked what exactly the young man was going to brew. estiḻ informed him that he needed dragon's breath, and therefore asked him to just follow the instructions, and promised that he could handle the last step himself. Finally, after a few failed attempts, 3 vials were in the guy's hands, which seemed to please the alchemist even more. He found that he was now able to create mid-level potions, though he had no idea what the dragon's breath was for. After examining the contents, estiḻ concluded that the dumbass had overdone the ingredients, considering that the same liquid in 3 different vials was a different color. Now he would have to perfect them, and after all, his power was already limited. It should have been spent fighting. Watching the ease with which the boy improved the potion, Alan realized that those born in elite families were really different from the rest. By the way, he noticed that this mysterious technique resembled the heritage of soul hardeners, and estiḻ, with a nonchalant face, confirmed that this was the case, finally killing the alchemist with a hurricane of surprise. The stunned alchemist even assumed that it was a joke, since a young man who had spent a good part of his life in slavery would have no place to get such knowledge. In fact, many years ago, someone had traveled to the guilds of saints to conduct alchemical research on soul fusion. Eventually, the Empire banned such experiments due to the potential risk. This individual concealed her identity with the help of estiḻ's father, and later took his surname, becoming Helena Lot. As far as the young man himself knew, this was exactly the chapter from the past that his mother had tried her best to forget, and had since dedicated herself to research in the spiritual arts. She managed to become famous throughout the Empire as a genius, but the past of the soul caster remained a secret for a long time, despite some suspicions. estiḻ had stated that he couldn't reveal everything, and besides, there was nothing special about it. For a second, Alan thought that this guy wanted to turn the world upside down by saying no big deal about something that even the big shots aspire to. In any case, estiḻ asked him not to tell anyone that he possessed the legacy, promising to reward the loyal alchemist with a portion of dragon's breath in return. The young man has noticed that the energy supply is limited, especially when the sacred seal is low. In addition to natural regeneration, it is possible to absorb the surrounding force of nature, albeit in limited quantities. The dragon's breath potion could greatly improve absorption, and therefore speed up recovery. estiḻ didn't even have time to notice Alan snatch the vial from his hands, unable to believe that now he would finally be able to return back to the capital. The young man assumed that the alchemist was very happy now, except that he wondered if he didn't want to become a true elite. Even after returning to the capital, he wouldn't be able to do anything with his base level of talent, spending the rest of his insignificant life in the empty status of one of the hundreds of alchemists in the capital. Alan stated that this was nonsense and he could definitely become stronger, though he couldn't answer the question of how exactly. estiḻ asked him to stay here for only 2 more months, promising to make him a third-class alchemist in exchange for one condition: Alan must act as a guide and let him get rid of the title of slave at the decisive trial. If a criminal is guided by a seal master of the 2nd class or higher, then, after proving their strength in court, both can receive absolution from the authorities and be freed from the title of criminal or slave. Even though such people remain under surveillance, in essence, they can enjoy all the rights of a free person. Of course, estiḻ still has incredible power, but if he tries to escape with this magical slave mark, he will become a wanted fugitive. It would then be difficult to travel between cities, and other slaves would be punished for escaping. What he needed now was the fastest possible increase in strength, something that basic training could not accomplish. The overseer wondered why estiḻ had returned only now, considering the misdemeanor he had committed. Beating Philip would not bode well, but the young man said he would kill the insolent deputy if he tried to get in trouble again. The warden explained that even if they were not his equal, there was someone much more powerful, the captain of the Shadow Iron Squad, Typhon Apaldi, who, by the way, had already arrived in the city. estiḻ was very interested in what he had heard. In that case, this captain would be just another stepping stone to increased power and subsequent success. Meanwhile, the president of the Guild of Saints and the third-class seal master Gag watched Lady Garcia in awe, and soon she showed them the heavenly fern she had grown from seed. Gag wondered if the plant would be a cure for the princess underworld disease, but the girl explained that it was only an intermediate step for now. The heavenly fern could be used to turn the underworld into ordinary ice lymph and then cut out the stinging herbs, but the plant required further processing. The warlock remarked that turning a deadly disease into a non-lethal one was an incredible innovation, but Garcia stated that she herself would like to learn dark alchemy from Haig. By the way, she inquired about the identity of the slave she'd seen in his lab yesterday. The name estiḻ did not mean anything to the man, but Mr. Edward remembered the grandson of the great hero of the Empire, who now, however, was no different from an ordinary slave. In such a case, Garcia assumed with trepidation that ленсэл was also the son of the legendary Helena Lanlot. The girl confessed that this genius of spiritual art is her most revered idol, a star that Garcia had always dreamed of reaching. Now it made sense to her how this kid could write such a recipe. Soon all three of them were standing on the doorstep of the city lord, who was zealously discussing with Alan the question of whether estiL Lanlot could take part in the decisive trial. When he saw the guests, he suggested that they discuss this sensitive subject together. Alan remarked that it was almost impossible, though not forbidden, to nominate a slave for the decisive trial. The lord recalled that his grandfather had been executed for treason, which was the gravest crime under the laws of the empire. Nevertheless, Alan did not give up, because their country had forgiven opposition generals before. Mr. Herman agreed with the reasoning of the alchemist, but suggested listening to the other participants in the discussion. Gag immediately stated that he was categorically against this venture. Moreover, putting aside the question of amnesty for the traitor's grandson, he asked if Alan realized the consequences of his decision to become a guide. Of course, he realized that the fate of a guide was somehow tied to that of a criminal. With his request, estiL was simply dragging the alchemist down. Moreover, if he were to commit another crime, the guide himself would also be responsible. Nevertheless, the young man reminded him that he was the only one who could help Alan to become stronger, so he asked the latter to be resolute. These arguments seemed to make the alchemist agree to ленсэл's terms. Herman explained that the old man's decision to become a guiding traitor would not only hit his reputation, but also the reputation of the entire guild. For this reason, he decided to ask Lady Garcia's opinion, and she exclaimed that it was wonderful. In her opinion, a man who had the valor to participate in the decisive trial would never accept the fate of a slave. By the way, she assumed that the emperor himself would have a different view of the city's head if, of course, Mr. Herman managed to recruit the boy into the ranks of Greyrock's warriors. What he heard made the man cheer up. This was exactly the answer he was looking for, and so he turned to Haig, asking him what he thought now. The warlock jumped up from his seat, shouting that in that case he wished to be the judge in this confrontation and to conduct the trial with maximum intensity. Should Lanlot fail the test, the man suggested that the guide be permanently expelled from the guild as punishment. Garcia remarked that this was too harsh, but Mr. Herman countered that it would show how seriously the guild took the matter. After receiving Alan's awkward agreement, the city lord announced that he would allow estiL Lanlot to attend the decisive trial to earn the possibility of amnesty. The trial itself, according to the man's decision, would take place in 3 days. Meanwhile, the slave himself was practicing the martial art of gust of wind, levitating huge boulders that he had previously had to carry on his back. Thanks to Dragon's Breath, he could practice more advanced techniques, and he had long since jumped to the basic level of the art. He promised that as soon as he was free, he would grow stronger even faster. Thus began estiL Lanlot's endless journey to great power.